I learned to recognize danger long before it learned my name. The rain hit the restaurant windows like warning shots, sharp and relentless, turning the street outside into a blur of red taillights and distorted reflections, and I kept my head down as I wiped the same clean glass for the third time, pretending I didn't feel it. That shift in the air, that quiet pressure that made my chest tighten for no reason anyone else could see. It was a Tuesday night, slow enough that the manager had already cut 2 servers, and the smell of burnt espresso clung to everything, mixing with the low hum of conversations and the soft clink of silverware. But underneath it all, something was wrong. I noticed the car first, parked across the street where no one ever parked, engine running, headlights off, just sitting there like it was waiting for something or someone. And then another one pulled in behind it. Same thing, no movement, no driver stepping out, just shadows behind tinted glass. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I'd learned the hard way what happened when I got involved in things that weren't mine, but my hands didn't listen. They slowed, my breath catching just slightly as I angled myself toward the window without making it obvious. That's when he walked in. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and rain, and the entire room shifted without a single word being spoken, conversations lowering, bodies straightening, like everyone felt it even if they didn't understand it. And I didn't need anyone to tell me who he was, because power like that didn't need introductions. He moved like he owned the space without asking for it. Dark coat, precise steps, eyes that didn't linger on anything yet missed nothing. And I felt it then, that instinct screaming louder, sharper, telling me he was the reason those cars were outside. I looked back to the window, just for a second, and this time I saw it clearly, the slight movement in the front seat, the reflection of something metallic catching the streetlight for half a heartbeat before disappearing again, and my stomach dropped because I knew what waiting looked like. I'd been the one being waited for once. I swallowed hard, forcing my attention back to the floor as I grabbed a menu, my fingers steady out of habit even as my pulse picked up, and I walked toward his table because that's what I was supposed to do, because pretending everything was normal was safer than admitting it wasn't. Evening, I said softly, placing the menu down in front of him, careful not to meet his eyes for too long. But I felt it anyway, that quiet weight of his attention settling on me like he already knew I was different from the others, like he could see the hesitation I was trying to hide. He didn't respond right away, just studied me for a second too long. And something about that made it harder to breathe, not fear exactly, but awareness, like standing too close to the edge of something you couldn't see the bottom of. I stepped back, turning to leave, telling myself it wasn't my problem, that he had people, that men like him always had people. But as I passed the window again, I saw one of the car doors shift open just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough for me, and my chest tightened because timing like that wasn't coincidence. He finished quickly, barely touching his drink, and when he stood, the room seemed to hold its breath again, like everyone knew something was about to happen even if they didn't know what, and I felt my feet stop moving before I told them to, my mind racing through every reason to stay quiet, every memory of what silence had cost me before. He walked toward the door, each step measured, controlled, and I knew that once he crossed that threshold, whatever was waiting outside would find him, and I wouldn't be able to pretend I hadn't seen it coming. My fingers curled slightly against my apron as I took a step forward, then another, my heart beating louder now, drowning out everything else. And just as his hand reached for the door, I closed the distance between us, my voice barely more than a breath as I leaned in close enough for only him to hear. "Don't go," I whispered, my throat tight but steady. "They're waiting outside." And for the first time since he walked in, the man everyone else feared paused. He did not flinch, did not turn, did not even move his hand away from the door, but the air around him changed in a way that made my breath catch, like something invisible had just locked into place, and for a second I thought maybe I had made a mistake, maybe I had read it wrong. Maybe this was the moment I learned that some warnings should stay unspoken, but then his fingers slowly loosened from the handle and the door remained closed, the rain still pounding on the other side like it was waiting too. I stepped back immediately, my pulse racing, already regretting everything, already preparing to apologize, to pretend it was nothing, to disappear back into the background where I belonged. But before I could say a word, he turned slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough that I could see his profile, sharp and controlled, his voice low when he spoke, so quiet I almost missed it. How many? The question hit me harder than anything else because it meant he believed me, or at least he was willing to consider it, and my throat tightened as I forced myself to answer. 2 cars, I whispered, keeping my eyes down, afraid of what I might see if I looked at him directly. Maybe 4 men. I saw movement, something metallic. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was measured, calculated, like he was running through possibilities faster than I could think. And then he straightened fully, adjusting his coat as if nothing had happened at all. To anyone watching, it looked like he had simply paused to check his reflection in the glass. But I felt it, the shift in control, the moment everything changed direction without anyone else realizing it. He took a step away from the door instead of toward it, slow and deliberate. And I felt my chest loosen just slightly, though I did not understand why. Because men like him did not step back unless they had already decided how the next move would play out. Stay where you are, he said under his breath. Not a command, not quite, but something that settled into me like one, and I nodded before I even realized I had done it. He moved then, not toward the exit, but deeper into the restaurant, his path casual, almost bored, stopping briefly at another table as if acknowledging someone, his presence drawing attention away from the entrance, away from the windows, and I followed his movement without meaning to, my hands gripping the edge of the counter as I tried to steady my breathing. Outside, the cars had not moved, but I saw it again, that slight shift, that awareness, like whoever was waiting had noticed the delay, and something cold slid down my spine because waiting could turn into acting in a heartbeat. I should have walked away, should have gone back to the kitchen, pretended none of this was happening, but my feet would not listen, rooted in place as I watched him stop near the bar, speaking briefly to a man in a dark suit who had not been there before, or maybe he had, and I just had not noticed, and that thought alone made my skin prickle. The man nodded once, subtle, almost invisible, and then disappeared toward the back, and suddenly I realized this had never been random, not for him, not for someone like him, because he did not walk into places unprepared. The rain grew louder, or maybe it was just my heartbeat, and I forced myself to look away, to focus on anything else. But then the door opened suddenly, a rush of cold air sweeping in, and one of the men from outside stepped just inside the threshold, his gaze scanning the room quickly, searching, and every instinct I had screamed that this was the moment everything would go wrong. But Adrian did not move toward him, did not react the way I expected. Instead, he remained exactly where he was, calm, composed, his attention shifting just slightly, enough that I knew he had seen the man too, and for a second that stretched too long. Nothing happened at all, just the sound of rain and the low murmur of unaware conversations, until the man hesitated, just barely, like something about the room felt different now, like the situation he had expected was no longer there, and then he stepped back outside, the door closing again with a soft click. I exhaled without realizing I had been holding my breath, my knees weak, my mind struggling to keep up with what I had just witnessed, because whatever game had been waiting outside had just been rewritten without a single raised voice, without a single visible move. And when I finally looked back at Adrian, he was already looking at me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp, focused, like he had just decided something that included me whether I wanted it or not. His eyes did not leave mine, and for a moment the entire restaurant seemed to disappear, the noise fading into something distant and hollow, like I was standing in the center of a storm that had not decided whether to break yet. And I felt it again, that same instinct that had kept me alive before, telling me this was the moment where everything shifted, not outside, not in the rain, but right here between us. I dropped my gaze first, not out of submission, but because holding it felt like stepping too close to something I did not understand, my fingers tightening against the counter as I forced myself to breathe normally, to act like I had not just stepped into something far bigger than a late-night shift in a quiet tip jar. He moved toward me then, slow, controlled, each step deliberate, and I realized too late that there was nowhere to step back to, nowhere to hide, because people like him did not approach without purpose. He stopped just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him in contrast to the cold air that still lingered from the open door, and when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, impossible to ignore. You noticed them before they moved. It was not a question, but I nodded anyway, my throat tight, unsure what answer would be safe, unsure if there even was one. "I have seen that kind of waiting before," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them, because some truths refused to stay buried when they were needed most. His gaze sharpened at that. Not surprised, not impressed, just more focused, like I had confirmed something he had already suspected. "And yet you chose to speak," he said. And this time there was something else beneath the control, something quieter, something almost curious, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes for just a second. "Silence is not always safer," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. Because I had learned that lesson the hard way, and some habits did not fade. They stayed, waiting for moments like this. Another pause followed, but it was different from the one at the door, less about decision, more about evaluation, like he was measuring something invisible, something that had nothing to do with the cars outside anymore. Around us, the restaurant continued as if nothing had changed, glasses clinking, a server laughing too loudly near the bar, but it all felt distant, unreal, like none of it belonged to this moment. "They will not try again tonight," he said finally, and the certainty in his voice made something in my chest loosen, even though I knew better than to trust certainty from a man like him, because certainty like that came from experience, from a world I did not want to understand. I nodded again, unsure what else to do, unsure if that meant I could step away now, pretend this had never happened, go back to refilling drinks and counting tips like my life had not just brushed against something dangerous. But he did not move, did not dismiss me, and that was when I realized this was not over, not for him, and definitely not for me. His hand reached into his coat, slow enough that it did not startle me, but deliberate enough that I felt my breath hitch anyway. And when he pulled it back out, there was no threat, no sudden movement, just a simple card held between his fingers, clean, minimal, the kind of thing that did not need explanation. He placed it on the counter in front of me, his gaze never leaving mine. "If you see something again," he said, his tone even, controlled, but carrying weight in a way I could not ignore, "you do not whisper." My fingers hovered over the card, not touching it yet, as his words settled in, heavy, unavoidable. "You call." The simplicity of it should have made it easy to refuse, easy to step back, to say no, to remind myself that getting involved with men like him only led to places you could not come back from. But my hand moved anyway, picking up the card before my mind caught up, and the moment I did, I felt it, that quiet shift inside me, like a line had been crossed without a single step taken. He watched me for one last second, then turned away, the distance between us reappearing just as quickly as it had disappeared, his presence already pulling the room back into its orbit as he moved toward the door again. And this time, when he stepped outside into the rain, nothing followed, nothing moved, the street empty as if it had never been waiting at all. I stood there long after the door closed, the card still in my hand, my pulse finally beginning to slow, but the echo of his words refusing to fade, because deep down, I knew this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something I had just chosen without fully understanding the cost. I told myself I would throw the card away the moment my shift ended. That was the plan I repeated in my head as I moved through the rest of the night, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling when I was supposed to, but the card stayed in my apron pocket, pressed flat against my hip like it had weight far beyond paper, like it was reminding me with every step that some choices did not disappear just because you decided to ignore them. The rain did not stop, it only softened, turning into a steady whisper against the windows as the restaurant emptied out, one table at a time, until the noise faded and the lights seemed too bright for the silence that replaced it. By midnight, it was just me and the closing crew, the manager counting receipts at the register, the dishwasher humming to himself in the back, everything normal again, or at least normal enough that it should have been easy to forget what had happened. But I could not forget the way he had paused, the way the entire situation outside had unraveled without a single raised voice, without anything visible happening at all, and more than that, I could not forget the way he had looked at me, like I had stepped into something I was not supposed to understand, and somehow understood anyway. I clocked out at 12:17, the digital screen blinking my hours in dull green numbers, and for a second I just stood there, staring at it, letting the quiet settle around me, telling myself again that I would walk out, drop the card in the trash, and go home like nothing had changed. My hand slipped into my pocket before I could stop it, fingers brushing the smooth edge, and I pulled it out slowly, turning it over under the fluorescent light. No logo. No title. Just a name and a number. Adrian Volkov. Simple. Controlled. Like everything else about him. I exhaled slowly, folding it once, then again, like making it smaller would make it less real, and shoved it back into my pocket as I grabbed my coat. The back exit was closer, but I chose the front without thinking, my steps slower than usual as I approached the door, my eyes flicking toward the street automatically, half expecting to see those cars still there, half expecting to prove to myself that I had imagined everything. The street was empty. Completely empty. No headlights. No silhouettes. Just wet pavement reflecting the streetlights and the distant sound of a passing car somewhere down the block. I told myself that should have been reassuring, but it was not, because I knew the difference between gone and finished, and this did not feel finished. I stepped outside anyway, pulling my coat tighter around me as the cool air hit my skin, the faint smell of rain and asphalt filling my lungs, grounding me in something real, something normal. My car was parked half a block down, right where I had left it, and I started toward it, my shoes splashing lightly through shallow puddles, my eyes scanning without meaning to, checking corners, reflections, movement, habits I had tried to forget but never fully unlearn it. Halfway there, I slowed. Not because I saw something, because I felt it. That same quiet pressure from earlier, subtle but unmistakable, like the night was holding its breath again. I stopped walking, my grip tightening on my keys as I listened, really listened, beyond the distant traffic, beyond the soft drip of water from the awnings, searching for anything out of place. Nothing. And that was what made it worse. I took another step forward, then another, forcing myself to keep moving, telling myself I was being paranoid, that the danger had passed, that he had handled whatever it was, and I was no longer part of it. But then I saw it. Not a car this time. A reflection. In the dark window of the building across the street. Just for a second, a shape where there should have been none, gone as quickly as it appeared, but enough to make my breath catch. Enough to remind me that waiting did not always happen in plain sight. My heart started to race again, louder now, sharper, and I reached my car, fumbling slightly with the keys before unlocking it, my hand shaking just enough to notice as I pulled the door open. I should have gotten in. I should have driven away. But I hesitated, just for a second, the memory of his voice cutting through my thoughts with quiet clarity. You do not whisper. You call. My fingers tightened around the keys, then slowly, almost without thinking, I reached into my pocket again, pulling the card back out, staring at the number like it might disappear if I blinked. The night felt heavier now, closer, like it was waiting for me to decide something I was not ready to decide. I looked down at the card one more time, my thumb hovering over my phone screen as I unlocked it, my breath uneven as I hesitated, knowing that the moment I made this call, there would be no pretending this was just another night, no stepping back into the life I had before. And for a long second that stretched too far, I just stood there in the rain, caught between walking away and stepping into something I could not control. I pressed call before I could change my mind. The sound of the line connecting felt too loud in the quiet street, each second stretching longer than it should, my eyes scanning the reflections around me, searching for movement that refused to fully reveal itself, and for a brief, irrational moment I wondered if he would even answer, if this had all been some test I was never meant to pass. The call picked up on the second ring. No greeting, no hesitation, just silence on the other end that felt controlled, aware, like he had been expecting something without knowing exactly what. I swallowed, my voice lower than usual as I forced the words out. It is me. The pause that followed was brief, but it carried recognition, immediate and certain. You do not sound like someone who calls without a reason, he said, his voice as steady as it had been inside the restaurant. Unchanged, unaffected by distance or time, and something about that steadiness grounded me just enough to speak clearly. I think they are still here, I said, my eyes fixed on the dark glass across the street. Not the same cars, but it feels the same. Silence again, but not empty this time. Calculating. Measuring. I could almost hear the shift in his focus through the line, like everything else had been pushed aside in favor of this moment. Do not get into your car, he said, calm but firm, and I froze with my hand still on the door handle, my breath catching slightly as his words settled in. Step back. Slowly. Do not look for them. Let them think you have not seen anything. My fingers loosened from the handle immediately, my body responding before my mind could question it. And I took a step back, then another, my movements controlled, careful, like I had done this before, like I remembered how to disappear in plain sight. "Where are you?" he asked, and I gave him the address, my voice steady even as my pulse picked up again, louder now, sharper, because this was no longer a feeling, no longer instinct alone. This was real enough for him to act on. "Stay on the line," he said, and there was no room to argue, not that I would have, because something about the way he spoke made it clear this was not a suggestion. I leaned casually against the side of my car, forcing my posture to relax, forcing my breathing to slow, even as every part of me stayed alert, listening for footsteps, for engines, for anything that would confirm what I already knew. "You said you have seen this before," he continued after a moment, his tone quieter now, but no less focused. I hesitated, just for a second, because that was not a door I opened easily, not for anyone, but the night had already crossed too many lines for me to pretend I could keep everything separate. "I used to think if I ignored it, it would pass," I said slowly, my eyes tracking a faint movement in the distance that disappeared when I tried to focus on it directly. "But it does not pass. It waits." Another pause, longer this time, and I wondered what he was thinking, what he was deciding, because men like him did not just listen, they acted, and every second that passed felt like it was building towards something I could not see yet. "You were right to call," he said finally, and the words landed heavier than they should have, not because of what they meant, but because of what they implied, that this was not over, that whatever had followed me out into the night was not a coincidence. A car passed at the end of the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the buildings, and for a split second, the reflection in the glass sharpened again, enough for me to catch the outline of a figure standing where there should have been no one, still, watching, waiting. My breath caught, but I did not move, did not react, remembering his words, letting the moment pass without giving it away. "I see one of them," I whispered, barely audible, my voice controlled despite the tension building in my chest. The line stayed silent for half a heartbeat. Then his voice returned, sharper now, more precise. "Do not engage. Do not run." I closed my eyes briefly, grounding myself in the sound of his voice, in the steady rhythm of it that cut through the noise in my head. "I am not far," he added, and something about that shifted everything again. Not safety exactly, but direction, like the night had been waiting for a move and now it had one. I opened my eyes, staring straight ahead, forcing myself to stay still, to trust that this was no longer just me against whatever was out there. And for the first time since I stepped outside, the fear in my chest changed into something else, something quieter, sharper, like anticipation. Because deep down, I knew this moment would decide more than just how the night ended. I stayed exactly where I was, my back lightly resting against the cold metal of the car, the phone pressed close to my ear as if the connection itself could keep everything around me from shifting any closer. And for a moment the entire street felt suspended, like the world had narrowed down to the sound of distant traffic and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. "Do you still see him?" Adrian's voice cut through the silence, steady and controlled, and I focused on the reflection again, careful not to move my head too much, letting my eyes do the work instead. "Not clearly," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But he has not left." That was the problem. Waiting that did not end usually meant something else was coming. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm, remembering every instinct that had kept me safe before, the ones that told me panic only made you visible. "Good," he said, and the word caught me off guard, because nothing about this felt good, not the stillness, not the quiet, not the fact that someone was standing out there with a purpose I could not see. "Good," I repeated softly before I could stop myself. There was a brief pause, then I heard it, the faint sound of an engine through the phone, low and controlled, like he was already moving. "It means they are unsure," he said, his tone precise, analytical, like he was explaining something simple instead of something that made my pulse spike. And uncertainty makes people hesitate. I let that sink in, my grip tightening slightly around the phone as I shifted my weight just enough to stay comfortable without drawing attention. Hesitation. I knew that word. I had lived in that space before, the thin line between acting and waiting, the The moment where everything could still change direction. What should I do? I asked quietly, because standing still felt like doing nothing, and doing nothing had never sat well with me. Exactly what you are doing, he replied immediately, no hesitation this time. You are not the target. Do not become one by reacting. The words settled into me, sharp and clear, and I forced myself to relax my shoulders, to loosen my grip on the keys, to look like someone waiting for a ride or checking a message instead of someone who had just called a man like him for help. Another car passed at the far end of the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the wet pavement, and this time, when the light shifted across the glass, I saw it more clearly, the outline of a figure stepping back into shadow, adjusting position, like they were recalibrating. My breath slowed, not out of calm, but out of focus, because now I knew I had not imagined it, and that made everything sharper. They moved, I said under my breath, careful to keep my tone even. There was no immediate response, just a faint change in the sound of his breathing, like he was processing, mapping something I could not see. I am 2 blocks away, he said finally, and something in his voice shifted, not louder, not faster, but more defined, like whatever decision he had made earlier was now in motion. 2 blocks. That was close enough to matter. I glanced down at the ground briefly, using the movement to hide the way my eyes scanned the street again, the way my body tensed despite my effort to stay still. Do not look for me, he added, and I almost smiled at that, a small, fleeting reaction that surprised even me, because it sounded like something someone would say before stepping into a situation they already controlled. I nodded, even though he could not see it, my voice steady when I answered. I understand. The seconds stretched again, each one heavier than the last, but this time it felt different, less like waiting and more like something building, something aligning in a way I could not fully grasp. The figure in the reflection shifted once more, then stilled, and for the first time, I noticed something else, a second shadow further down the block, less obvious, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. My pulse spiked again, sharper now, more urgent, because this was no longer one unknown presence. It was more layered, deliberate. There is another one, I said, my voice low but firm, the words coming faster now. The response was immediate. Yes, Adrian said, and the certainty in that single word sent a chill through me, not because it surprised me, but because it meant he already knew. Of course he did. Stay exactly where you are, he continued, and this time there was no mistaking it. It was not just guidance, it was instruction, precise and absolute. I closed my eyes for half a second, grounding myself in the sound of his voice, in the knowledge that whatever this was, it was no longer unfolding without direction. When I opened them again, the street looked the same, quiet, empty, unchanged, but I knew better now, knew that what I could not see mattered just as much as what I could. And as I stood there, still and silent, I felt it again, that shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the moment just before something finally revealed itself. And this time, I knew it would not be me who moved first. I felt it before I saw anything. That subtle shift in the air like a held breath finally released. And then the sound came, not loud, not dramatic, just the low, controlled hum of an engine turning onto the street behind me, slow enough to blend into the night if you were not paying attention, precise enough that it did not feel random. I did not turn. I did not move. I kept my posture relaxed, just like he told me, my gaze unfocused ahead of me as if I was still deciding whether to get into my car or check another message. But every part of me was listening now, tracking distance, direction, timing. They are repositioning, I said quietly into the phone, my voice steady despite the tension tightening in my chest. I know, Adrian replied immediately, his tone unchanged, but there was something underneath it now, something sharper, like a line had just been crossed. The engine behind me slowed, then stopped somewhere out of my direct line of sight, and I caught the reflection of it in the glass across the street, just enough to confirm it was closer than before, just enough to make my pulse spike again. Do not react, he said, and I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to stay loose, forcing my body to remain still even as every instinct told me to move, to get in the car, to leave. But leaving too soon could be just as dangerous as staying. The streetlight flickered once above me, casting a brief shadow that stretched and disappeared, and in that moment, I saw the figure from before step forward slightly, no longer completely hidden, no longer pretending not to be there. And something about that shift made it clear that whatever hesitation had existed earlier was fading. "They are closer," I whispered, my grip tightening around the phone. This time, there was no pause in his response. "Yes. Just that." One word, absolute, certain. Then, quieter, more deliberate. "You are going to walk forward." I blinked, the instruction catching me off guard, my mind trying to process it even as my body tensed slightly. "Forward," I repeated under my breath. "Toward the corner," he clarified, calm, precise, like he had already mapped every step I needed to take. "Not fast, not slow, like you were going home." My eyes flicked briefly toward the intersection at the end of the block, barely half a minute away if I kept a steady pace, but it felt further now, heavier, like each step would carry weight I could not see. "Trust me," he added, and the words landed differently than I expected, not as reassurance, but as something firmer, something that left no room for doubt. I swallowed, my fingers loosening slightly around the keys as I shifted my weight forward, pushing myself off the car with a movement that felt casual, unforced, even though my heart was beating harder now, faster, echoing in my ears. One step, then another. The sound of my shoes against the wet pavement felt louder than it should have, each footfall measured, controlled, as I resisted the urge to look over my shoulder, to check how close they were now, to confirm what I already knew. "Keep going," Adrian said softly, his voice steady in my ear, and I focused on that, on the rhythm of his words instead of the silence behind me. Halfway to the corner, I caught it again in the reflection, movement that matched mine, not rushing, not hiding anymore, just following, deliberate and patient, and my breath tightened slightly before I forced it back into something even, something controlled. "They are moving with me," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, and this time, there was something else there, something final, like the next moment had already been decided. I reached the corner, the street opening up slightly, the light brighter here, less shadow to hide in, and for a split second, everything felt exposed, too visible, too open, and then I heard it. A second engine. Closer. Controlled. Different from the one behind me. My steps slowed just slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to register the change, and then the car appeared, pulling up along the curb beside me with quiet precision, dark, polished, its windows tinted just enough to obscure everything inside except the outline of someone in the driver's seat. The passenger door unlocked with a soft, unmistakable click. "Get in," Adrian said, his voice no longer distant through the phone, but right there, present, grounded, and for the first time since I stepped outside, the chaos of the night narrowed into a single, clear choice. I did not hesitate. I reached for the handle and opened the door, sliding into the seat without looking back, without giving whatever was behind me the chance to become anything more than a shadow in the reflection. The door closed with a quiet thud, sealing off the sound of the street, the rain, the waiting, and as I looked up, finally meeting his eyes again in the dim interior, I realized something had shifted in a way I could not undo. Because this time, I had not just warned him. I had stepped into his world. The door closed and everything changed. The noise of the rain, the distant hum of the street, the quiet tension that had wrapped around me for the past hour, all of it dulled into something distant the second I was inside, like the world had been muted without warning, leaving only the steady sound of the engine and the quiet presence beside me. I did not speak right away. I did not move. I just sat there, my hand still resting near the door handle, my breath uneven as I adjusted to the shift, to the fact that I was no longer outside watching danger from a distance. I was sitting next to the kind of man danger rearranged itself around. He did not look at me immediately. His attention stayed forward, one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the center console, his posture relaxed in a way that did not match the precision of everything that had just happened. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, no sudden movement, no rush, just a controlled merge back into the empty street, as if nothing unusual had taken place at all. Only after we turned the corner did he finally glance at me. Not long, just enough. But it was enough to make my chest tighten. Again, because there was nothing casual about the way he looked at me, nothing distracted or uncertain, just focus, clear and deliberate. "You followed instructions well," he said, his voice low, even, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. I did not have many other options. I replied quietly, my voice steadier now, though my hands still felt slightly cold, like the tension had not fully left my system. He did not respond to that right away. His gaze shifted back to the road, but I could feel it, the way his attention had not fully left me, like he was still evaluating something he had not finished deciding. The car moved through the streets with quiet precision, each turn smooth, each stop calculated, and I realized after a minute that we were not heading toward anywhere familiar, not my apartment, not the route I usually took home, and something in me tightened again, not fear exactly, but awareness. Where are we going? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral, not accusatory, not uncertain, just direct enough to matter. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowed slightly at an intersection, checking both directions even though the street was empty, before continuing forward. Somewhere they are not, he said finally, and the simplicity of it should have been reassuring, but it only confirmed what I already knew, that this was not over, that whatever had followed me tonight had not simply disappeared when I stepped into his car. I looked down briefly, my fingers brushing against the fabric of my apron before I remembered I was still wearing it, still dressed like I belonged behind a counter instead of here, sitting in a car that felt too quiet, too controlled, too far removed from anything I recognized as normal. They were not waiting for me, I said after a moment, more to myself than to him, trying to make sense of the way everything had unfolded, trying to separate what belonged to me and what did not. No, he said, and this time his voice carried something sharper, more certain. But now they know you exist. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said, not loud, not dramatic, just direct, and I felt it settle into my chest in a way I could not ignore. I turned slightly toward him, my expression tightening despite my effort to stay composed. Because I warned you, I said quietly. He did not deny it. He did not soften it. Because you were seen, he corrected, his tone calm, but firm in a way that made it clear this was not something that could be undone. Silence filled the car again, thicker this time, heavier, because now there was no pretending this had been a single moment that could be left behind, no illusion that I could step back into my life and forget this night ever happened. I looked out the window, watching the reflections of streetlights blur across the glass, my thoughts racing faster now, sharper, trying to catch up with the reality I had just stepped into. Then I should not have called, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them, not regret exactly, but recognition of consequence. The car slowed slightly, not enough to stop, just enough to mark the moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but carried something that made me look back at him. No, he said, meeting my eyes for a second that felt longer than it should have. You should not have been alone. The words stayed with me, echoing in the quiet space between us, and for the first time since this started, something shifted inside me, not fear, not relief, but something more complicated, something that felt like the beginning of a truth I was not ready to fully understand. Because deep down, I knew this was no longer about a warning, or a phone call, or a night that went wrong. It was about what came next, and I had already stepped too far in to pretend I could walk away. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter street, one lined with tall buildings that blocked most of the city noise, the kind of place where everything felt a little more contained, a little more controlled, and I realized that was not accidental. Nothing about this felt accidental anymore. I sat back in the seat, my fingers resting loosely in my lap now, the initial tension fading into something more focused, more aware, like my mind had finally caught up with what my instincts had been trying to. Tell me all night. So what happens now? I asked quietly, my voice steady, because the question mattered more than anything else at this point, not just for the night, but for everything that would come after. He did not answer right away. Instead, he pulled the car to a smooth stop near the curb, the engine still running, the soft hum filling the silence between us. And for a moment, he just sat there, his gaze forward, his expression unreadable, like he was choosing his words with the same precision he used for everything else. Now, he said finally, turning slightly toward me, you stop pretending this was coincidence. The words landed with quiet weight, not forceful, not harsh, but impossible to ignore, and I felt my breath catch slightly as I processed them, because part of me had still been holding on to that idea, that this was just a bad night, a strange series of events that would fade once the sun came up. I was just working, I said, softer this time, not defensive, just honest, because that had been true before all of this started. He held my gaze for a second, longer than before, like he was measuring that truth against something else. And you still saw what others did not, he replied, his tone calm but certain, and I looked away briefly, my thoughts shifting back to the moment in the restaurant, the reflection in the glass, the instinct that had told me something was wrong before anything actually happened. That does not make me part of this, I said, even though the words felt less solid than they should have, less convincing the longer I sat there. No, he said again, and this time there was no pause, no hesitation, but it makes you visible to it. Silence followed, heavier now, because I knew he was right, even if I did not want to admit it out loud, even if part of me still wanted to believe I could step out of this and go back to the version of my life that existed before tonight. I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting toward the window, watching the faint reflection of the streetlights stretch across the glass, distorted but still there, like everything else that had happened. Then what do you expect me to do? I asked, turning back to him, because if I was already in this, if there was no stepping back, then I needed to understand where I stood. He studied me for a moment, not intimidating, not forceful, just focused in a way that made it clear he was not asking the question lightly. Stay where you can be protected, he said, simple, direct, and I felt the meaning behind the words settle in immediately, heavier than anything else he had said so far. I shook my head slightly, almost without thinking. I have a life, I replied, my voice firmer now, because that part of me had not disappeared, not completely. A job, a place I go back to. He did not argue. He did not dismiss it. You had a routine, he corrected, and the distinction hit harder than I expected, because it forced me to see the difference between what I thought I had and what actually remained after tonight. I looked down at my hands for a second, then back at him, the quiet settling again as the weight of that realization sank in. You are asking me to trust you, I said, not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact, because that was what this came down to now, not fear, not instinct, but choice. He did not look away. I am telling you that you already did, he replied, his voice steady, unshaken, and I felt something shift inside me again, something that had been building since the moment I whispered that warning, something I had not fully acknowledged until now. He was right. I had trusted him the second I spoke, the second I called, the second I stepped into this car without looking back. The realization settled into silence between us, quiet but undeniable, and for the first time, I understood that this was not about whether I belonged in his world or not. It was about the fact that I had already crossed into it. I leaned back slightly in the seat, my breath steady now, my thoughts clearer than they had been all night, and when I finally spoke again, my voice carried something new, something that had not been there before. Then I guess I need to know the rules, I said quietly, meeting his eyes without hesitation this time. A faint shift crossed his expression, not quite a smile, but something close. Enough to register, and he nodded once, slow and deliberate. Rule 1, he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying that same quiet authority, you do not face danger alone. The words echoed in the stillness of the car, simple, direct, but they stayed with me in a way I could not ignore, because for the first time, they did not feel like a warning. They felt like a promise,